hypothetical, just to get your response, something that actually happened. Like, for example, the United States Department of Justice seeking to track the cell phones of 8 members of the United States Senate without any criminal predicate, without any notice to any senator, multiple of whom sit on this committee, including myself, without any legal process to the senator targeted whatsoever. They tracked all incoming calls to our phones, all outgoing calls to our phones, all metadata associated with the calls, including location, the duration of the calls. Does this sound appropriate to you? Does this sound like appropriate behavior for the Department of Justice to be engaged in?
Support for it, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Mr. Dew, if I could just start with you. I've noticed that you've been asked a number of questions about hypotheticals, about political interference. What would happen if so-and-so tried to interfere in an investigation? What would happen if you were asked to pursue politically motivated ends? What would happen if you were asked to pursue or launch a politically motivated investigation? So let me just ask you about a non-hypothetical, just to get your response, something that actually happened. Like, for example, the United States Department of Justice seeking to track the cell phones of 8 members of the United States Senate without any criminal predicate, without any notice to any senator, multiple of whom sit on this committee, including myself, without any legal process to the senator targeted whatsoever. They tracked all incoming calls to our phones, all outgoing calls to our phones, all metadata associated with the calls, including location, the duration of the calls. Does this sound appropriate to you? Does this sound like appropriate behavior for the Department of Justice to be engaged in?
Senator Hawley, I appreciate the question, and I'm noticing the panel's asking me a lot. I'm happy to share with my colleagues as we keep going in this discussion. But, sir, what I think you're talking about is issuing a grand jury subpoena for cell phone records. And in any investigation, you better have, pursuant to the Justice Manual, specific and articulable facts about why you're doing that. If you do not have that and you cannot articulate those facts under 18 U.S.C. 2703, that subpoena does not get served.
You know, the other thing that's interesting about this context, and I appreciate your answer, is that the records that they sought to track and trace and tap, the devices that they sought, are in the possession of senators pursuant to their constitutional duties. 2 U.S.C. section 6628A specifically says that those records do not become the possession of cell phone companies. They don't become the possession of Verizon or AT&T or whomever. They are retained by the senator's office. Why? Because these devices are used pursuant to the speech and debate responsibilities of senators. Yet the Justice Department did not inform senators, did not seek from our offices these records. They went instead ex parte to the telephone companies, got the records apparently, again, with no criminal predicate that we know about, no process whatsoever. It is a grotesque violation of statutory law and also the separation of powers, particularly the speech and debate clause. Here you have an executive branch directly spying on members of the legislative branch while they are performing their constitutional duties. Let me just ask you, Mr. David, does this sound like something we want to normalize? I mean, is this something you'd like to see the current Justice Department doing on a regular basis? I mean, should they be tracking the cell phone records of everybody down here on the left side of the dais? Would that be a good thing for the country?
Clearly no, Senator.
Clearly no. Clearly no. I can't tell you what an outrage I think this is, and so it's just a little bit hard for me to stomach sitting here and listening to be asked about all of these various hypotheticals. This isn't a hypothetical. This happened. It happened, and so far there have been exactly 0 repercussions for it. And I just want to say that if my colleagues are serious about stopping political weaponization of the Justice Department, why don't we start with this right here? Why don't we find out who authorized this? Why don't we find out what laws, if any, were broken? Why don't we appoint a special prosecutor to go after this and get to the bottom of it? And I will just reiterate my calls for this committee to do full oversight hearings on exactly what happened as part of this weaponization, as part of this, I think, both illegal and unconstitutional targeting of United States senators in their constitutional responsibilities. At the same time, the same Justice Department was also targeting, we now know, thanks to whistleblowers, 92 separate conservative organizations, including Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, a campus organization. Why? I guess because it was conservative. I mean, this is the most unbelievable abuse of the Justice Department that I've not only seen in my lifetime, that I've ever read or heard about in our country's history, because it's not one little thing, it's an entire pattern. This is the same Justice Department that sent a SWAT team to the home of a pro-life demonstrator. This is the same Justice Department and FBI that tried to recruit informants into Catholic parishes. This is the same Justice Department that targeted the chief political opponent of the then sitting president for prosecution to try to keep him off of a ballot. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I hope that my colleagues agree. I hope we can all agree. We cannot allow this to become the norm. And I hope, Mr. Duva, if you are confirmed, you will do your part in the criminal division to make sure that the resources of this powerful, powerful agency are used for good, to protect the American people, protect the rule of law, to put violent criminals away, not to prosecute the political agendas of some politician somewhere. Thanks for being.
I will, Senator. Thank you.
Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Could you say that again, Mr. Chairman?
You know,
I like that.
I'm amazed at how quickly it went to your head.
You shouldn't be. You know me well.
Well, that's true, but I wanted to keep it on the down low so you could at least maintain the appearance of a reasonable person. But it's good to have you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Crane, in Louisiana, the state of Louisiana judges have to run for election, which I think has some unfortunate consequences. That obviously is not your creation. If you want to be a judge, you got to run. But it meant you had to do what we have to do. You had, I guess, in one of your campaigns, 1.2 million. And I know you'll get legal contributions, and that'll include from the oil and gas industry, which oftentimes, which does have litigation in front of the court. I know that one of the controversial cases that you had to make a decision on
In that moment, the room fell silent. Senator Josh Hawley's voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the air like a blade. "Something that actually happened," he said. "Not a theory, not a rumor, but a direct claim that the Department of Justice had tracked the phones of sitting United States senators. Every call, every trace of data, every signal. It was not a question meant for debate. It was an accusation meant to pierce the heart of power itself." Across the panel, faces stiffened. The Assistant Attorney General hesitated, searching for language that could soften what had just been laid bare. But there was no softening this, not when a senator had just declared that members of Congress, the representatives of the people, may have been spied upon by their own government. What unfolded in that chamber was not just political theater. It was a warning, a confrontation between two visions of justice, one that wields power quietly, behind sealed doors, under the cloak of legal process, and another that demands the light, transparency, accountability, and truth. Hawley's voice didn't waver. He called it a grotesque violation of law and the Constitution. He described the breach not only as an attack on privacy, but as an assault on the very separation of powers that defines American democracy. Because if the executive branch can monitor the legislative branch, if the watchers can watch the ones meant to hold them accountable, then who remains to guard the republic itself? In that question, the stakes became clear. This wasn't about partisanship. It wasn't even about one senator or one department. It was about the fragile balance between power and principle, the invisible thread that keeps government from turning inward against its own people. The Assistant Attorney General, caught in the moment, could only manage, "Clearly no, Senator." A small phrase, but beneath it lay an admission that something had gone terribly wrong. Hawley pressed on, his tone rising. He reminded the committee that senators' devices are protected under the Constitution's Speech and Debate Clause, that these are not mere phones, but instruments of governance, protected by law from executive intrusion. Yet, if his words were true, the Department of Justice had gone around those protections, seizing data not through open inquiry, but in secret, not through oversight, but through surveillance. He spoke of an executive branch spying on legislators performing their constitutional duties. He spoke of whistleblowers, of conservative organizations targeted, of churchgoers monitored, of political opponents prosecuted. To him, this was not coincidence. It was a pattern, a slow corrosion of the line between justice and power. And then, the silence again. A silence that carried more weight than any rebuttal. Because every democracy must confront this moment, when authority overreaches, when institutions drift from service to control, when trust gives way to fear. In that moment, we are asked to decide whether power will be questioned or whether it will be obeyed. This was Hawley's warning, that the weaponization of justice is not something that arrives with a loud crash, but with quiet normalization, with the shrug of an official, with the routine approval of a process that just follows protocol, until one day the extraordinary becomes ordinary. In the marble chambers of Washington, history echoes. From church committee hearings to Watergate, from Snowden to the Patriot Act, the pattern repeats, the same questions, the same moral test. How much power should one government have over the people who built it? How many secrets can justice keep before it ceases to serve its name? As the cameras kept rolling, Hawley called for oversight, for investigation, for a special prosecutor. He demanded that someone, anyone, be held accountable. But in the eyes of those listening, there was more than outrage. There was fatigue. The fatigue of a nation that has watched too many hearings end in silence, too many scandals dissolve into memory, and yet every time the truth surfaces, even for a moment, something sacred stirs in the American conscience. It's the belief that truth still matters, that the rule of law is not a partisan tool, that the people, through their representatives, still have the right to question power, and to demand that it answer. This is what the hearing revealed, not just the accusation that phones were tracked, but the deeper reality that trust itself is on trial. Trust in our justice system, in our institutions, in the integrity of those sworn to protect both freedom and fairness. Because democracy does not die when enemies attack it from without. It falters when those entrusted to defend it turn their gaze inward and forget who they serve. It erodes when transparency becomes a threat, when accountability becomes optional, and when silence becomes policy. That is the story this moment tells, of a government powerful enough to surveil, and a senator bold enough to ask, why? In that question lies the future of every republic that's ever existed, the difference between power that protects and power that corrupts, between liberty sustained by courage and liberty surrendered to convenience. So when Senator Hawley demanded answers, it was not only for himself. It was for every citizen who has ever wondered what happens behind closed doors, for every voice that has been monitored, every right quietly narrowed, every truth buried under process and bureaucracy. And as the hearing closed, his words lingered, not as outrage, but as reminder, that vigilance is not paranoia, it is patriotism, that the same Constitution which grants authority also binds it, and that the promise of this nation, liberty and justice for all, cannot survive without accountability for those who betray it. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the reckoning. Because power left unchecked will always reach further, and freedom, if it is to endure, must always speak louder. This was not just a hearing, it was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when the guardians of justice become the subjects of it, when the hunter becomes the hunted, when the question shifts from what is legal to what is right. And in that reflection, the American people must choose what they will accept and what they will refuse to forget. Because in the end, democracy is not defended by institutions. It is defended by awareness, by outrage, by courage. So let this moment be remembered, not as another headline, but as a warning and as a call. This is Liberty Country. Subscribe to Liberty Policy and stand for truth before truth disappears.